Hello BookTube and welcome to Weekly Reads. I had a rough start to my reading week last week, but it quickly improved. So let's get started, because I have a lot of books to talk about. So I started the week with a Belle redemption. I had hoped to be able to redeem Alamo House by Sarah Byrd. I tried this novel in late February and bailed on it, and I had hoped, giving it another shot, I'd have a better time with the book. It's about a young woman whose boyfriend is slovenly, and she's tired of picking up after him, so she initially intends to threaten him to clean up his act by threatening to move into this all-women's, like, it's a house that houses female graduate students. It's not quite a sorority, I don't think. It's more of like a hostel or like some kind of group home. Anyway, and she, instead of just using it as a threat, she says, I'm just going to move in. And shenanigans happens from there. I bailed, again, roughly about where I bailed last time. This book is just not for me. I don't particularly care for the style of first-person narration Byrd uses, and I didn't like it. So, Belle redemption rejected. And I said, if it was a Belle redemption achieved for Alamo House, I was going to move on to Blue Angel by Francine Prose. But if it was a Belle redemption rejected, I wasn't even going to bother moving on to Blue Angel, and that's what I did. So instead, I read If Then by Jill Lepore. This is basically, the subtitle is How the Simulmatics Corporation Invented the Future. And I have to say, I loved every minute and hour I spent with this book. This book is phenomenal. It's basically the history of the Simulmatics Corporation, which was a precursor, a foreshadowing of a lot of what's going on today, particularly with data analytics, social media, that sort of thing. So the Simulmatics Corporation was a brainchild of an ad man, Ad Greenfield, who gathered together a group of behavior scientists, mathematicians, early computer programmers, and essentially thought that by analyzing poll data and other similar forms of data, that they could predict human behavior and also influence human behavior. And that's essentially what they tried to do. The Simulmatics Corporation didn't quite achieve as much as they would have liked to have. And that's probably a good thing. They made their name by arguing that the Kennedy campaign in 1960 should do two or three things. One was confront his Catholicism head on, as well as appealing to African Americans, which at this period, while Roosevelt managed to move African Americans from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, African Americans were beginning to migrate back to the Republicans, as at this time Republicans were seen as stronger on civil rights than Democrats were. And by Kennedy really making a strong statement about civil rights, his call to Coretta Scott King, that he solidified the African American vote for him and subsequently the Democrats in general. And they took this sort of credit. I mean, it's highly likely Kennedy and his campaign decided to do this with or without Simomatic's input. They sort of took the claim for this as a means to expand their business with business clients, with the government, with newspapers, the 1962 elections. Simomatic's worked with the New York Times, which was a bit of a disaster. And then they also got involved in Vietnam. And of course, Joe Lepore basically represents the history of Simomatic's involvement in Vietnam, as well as aspects of the Great Society and the company's eventual collapse, as they kind of sort of sucked at what they did. And how Simomatic's legacy lives on in the internet, social media, Cambridge Analytica, so on and so forth. So this was a brilliant book. I, again, loved every minute and hour I spent with it. I really need to make a note to track down more of Lepore's work, because it's really hitting it out of the park. So, after I finished If Then, I read some slim volumes of poetry. I didn't have enough time to read some of the selected and collected poetry collections, so I just focused on slim volumes. I first read the new Black by Evie Shockley, and I quite liked the poems in this collection. There were only about 3, I think, that I didn't really get on with, and those were largely, the poems were kind of like form poems, where the language, the text is manipulated to form an image. X marks the spot, which the poem's a giant X, and so on and so forth. But I quite enjoyed the collection, for the most part, especially Improperty Behavior. That poem is brilliant, I think. And there are quite a few other really good ones here, too. I next moved on to the 2 from the University of Chicago that I quite enjoyed. First up was Troy Unincorporated by Francesca Abbate. This is a collection that translates Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida from Troy to Troy, Wisconsin, and translates the Trojan War into basically a small town in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's about Cressida, who's a young woman who leaves town, and her high school sweetheart who's dying of some unknown disease. And I think individually I quite like the poems, but I think together I don't really think it works all that well as a whole. But I mean, individually quite brilliant, but together not entirely sure about that. And I also read The Lions by Peter Campion. This is the other University of Chicago Press collection of poetry I picked up this past month. And I love this collection. A lot of really good poems here. Especially The Lions, Embarcadero, I quite liked. So yeah, I definitely really enjoyed this one. And I ended up my reading week with Larvae of the Nearest Stars by Catherine W. Carter. This is a slim volume of poetry out from LSU, and quite enjoyed it. I had a bit of a rough start with the collection, but the poems really started to grow on me, and I really quite liked them by the end. So, quite enjoyed the collection. So, yeah. quite a good poems in here too. Anyway, so that largely wrapped up my reading week. I did read some bits of literary criticism from last week's New York Times book review, as well as the New York Review of Books and book forum, which I'm not really going to talk about. But anyway, so starting, what am I going to be reading first week of May? So this past Wednesday, Rick McDonald did the second BookTube spin, where participants basically list 20 books. He spins a wheel, and the number that it eventually, the little arrow lands on, is the book that is the participant will read at over the course of May and June. I didn't put up a list of possible books. I didn't really have much time, and I was kind of debating whether or not I should participate, but I ended up going ahead and participating, and the book that ended up being my selection was Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. In hindsight, I probably should have put Heart Divided, but I think that was like later on. But anyway, I'm going to get to Heart Divided later eventually. So anyway, on to Burnt Sugar. This book made the rounds of booktubers who pay attention to the Booker Prize. This was shortlisted for the Booker last year and was also on the long list of the Women's Prize this year, although it didn't make the shortlist. This is about a mother's or a daughter's relationship with her mother and how it's rather toxic. So I will start this tomorrow and see how we get on, or how I get on with it. I know by now, unfortunately, there's a bit of, I haven't gotten on with any of the general fiction, literary fiction, whatever you want to call it, over the past few months. And so, whenever I make these, like, getting around to reading some general fiction or literary fiction, there's always the possibility that I'm going to bail on it, that it's not going to agree with me. And that's worrying, because I do have, over the course of May, several books of general fiction or literary fiction I intend to read. I'm going to give because I wanted to do a bit more of a theme read in May. So I'm going to read a lot of Asian literature that I have, or Asian American. So I'm going to start with Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I'm also going to give The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri a second go. I'll probably get around to The Surrendered by Chang Rae Lee at some point. Some science fiction and fantasy written by Asians and Asian Americans, as well as nonfiction, which is the second thing I'm aiming to read this week, is Minor Feelings by Cathy Hong Park, which is for the BookTube Prize. So, I won't be able to talk about it until the final wrap-up of the quarterfinals. But anyway, if I do have any issues for this week, I did go ahead and pick out some alternatives once I find them. So, first up will probably be The Sound of the Mountain by Yasunari Kawabata. This is one of the Kawabata novels I received as a present from a professor of mine who taught an introduction to Japanese class, Japanese culture class. Quite enjoyed that class. And I've read this before and quite enjoyed it, but it has been a while, so it is well past time I give this a reread. And a more recent acquisition, Fireheart Tiger by Elliot deBodard, which I'm looking forward to getting to. So we shall see how things go, and hopefully I don't actually bail on anything this coming week. Since pretty much 2 weeks in a row I've had some bails, so we shall see. Wish me luck. And as far as the other readathons in May, I don't think I'm going to be doing the springathon because I don't have any books here that match the prompts. I really need to make a note to add to my nature books. I only have Underland at the moment. I need to add some more. And I don't know if I want to participate in maybe Midrash. There's one book I have that probably fits the, or at least it's nonfiction, that would fit, and that I might, if I have time towards the end of the month, I might tackle that one, but it's a hefty book. And I'll talk about that as needed. If not, I'll get to that book probably sometime in October or November. So, anyway, BookTube, I'll go ahead and sign off for now. Hopefully I'll have some books, or not some books, more videos up next week. I do want to do the science fiction response video, along with the thing about the Hugos and stuff, and some tags, and maybe even try season 2 of Has Steve Read It, along with some book tags and whatever else draws my attention over the coming week, and of course next week's weekly reads. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great weekend, and I will see you next week, and stay safe.